I've posted in here before, and I don't know if this story is allowed because it's not a ghostly experience or haunted house, but I have zero explanation for the event. Before I tell you my story, I'm gonna give you some context about my drive home from work, the state I live in, and such. This happened about 10 minutes after I left work today, July 4th, 2020. I live in Northeast Ohio, and I got a new job about 2 months ago as a process technician at a dairy plant. It pays very good money, considering it's a 35-mile drive one way. After about 20 or 25 miles, I drive through a wooded area. Nothing uncommon for me, as where I live in Ney, Ohio, forests are common, and I pretty much lived in the one behind my grandma's house growing up. I work from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m., and the drive home sucks. Whether it's being tired, hungry, or the fog almost every night, I go the same way every day and night. I was driving my way home. I just left the residential area of my workplace and was going through the forested area. As I said, there's almost fog every night, so I'm on high alert for deer, raccoons, and such critters. It's just like every other drive home so far. I have a podcast on, focusing on the road, thinking of getting either a sausage McMuffin or MC griddle from McDonald's and sometimes looking off to the side of the road for any eyes reflecting off my headlights. All of a sudden, I see some reflecting eyes. Out of the woods comes a coyote. In my hometown, coyotes aren't too rare. I'd seen them by my high school but had never seen one outside of my hometown, so it surprised me. I start slowing down as it crosses the road, until it turns to my car and sits in the road. It sat about 10 feet from my car. There had been no cars I had seen since leaving the residential area, so I was going to go around it, but I thought this was too odd of a thing to happen to just drive away from it. I expected it to just get up and walk away at any given second. This is where I began to get very scared. I honked my horn, and after about 2 or 3 seconds, it smiled at me. I have my brights on, so I can see it perfectly. This coyote had human-shaped teeth. My heart dropped and every hair on my body raised, just as it is now recalling this incident. It lasted about 1 second, before sitting up and running into the woods. I sat there in fear for about 5 seconds, before shoving my foot on the pedal and driving at getaway speed. I didn't stop and get food cause I had, and still have, no appetite. I thought the rest of the ride home what I saw, once doubting I saw it, but as I said, with my brights on and it as close to my car as it was, I saw it as clear as day. This coyote had human teeth, and there was no doubt about it. I'm very into the paranormal, and that includes cryptids. Is it possible I ran into a skinwalker or some genetically mutated coyote? I'm Native American if that counts for anything. It's so weird typing this out, but I'd like someone who knew more about these things to help out if they can. I know one thing though, and that's I'm finding a new way to work. For many years of my life I've been followed by something, and tonight I'm at my wit's end and am reaching out hoping someone has an idea. When I was around 8, I had my first encounter. All that happened was I felt a hard grasp on my shoulder. No one was there. When I was about 15 was the next major encounter in a different house. Up till then, there was the occasional weird occasion life feeling of being watched, but when I was 15, I was chatting with a friend over the phone. It was around 1 in the morning I think and I felt off. So for context, I had a grate next to my bed that led into a room for insulation. Anyway, I got out of bed cause I felt weird and saw a figure of a person in the street, but its shadow was significantly longer than it should have been. Reaching down the street despite the light shining almost right behind it. I panicked and went back to bed but noticed the grate was moved, with just the empty room open. I quickly put the grate back on the opening and looked out to the street and the figure was gone. That was it for that night. A couple of months ago, at my current apartment, I dreamed of an out-of-body experience where I saw the figure standing in the corner of the room watching me and my girlfriend sleep. She also said she had a similar dream. A few weeks later I got this overwhelming feeling I was being watched. I left my apartment to pick up my brother from work after dark and felt the paranoia the whole way there. Once I parked, while waiting, I looked up from my phone and for a split second saw it in the side mirror watching from behind my car. It was a gray-skinned, bald humanoid with pale, yellow eyes and no mouth. Tonight I had a similar anxious feeling, and I just want ideas of what this could be.
So one night my wife, son, and I went to stay over at my wife's parents' house. It had gotten dark and my son, about 2 at the time, got sleepy, so I decided to put him to bed. Let me try to explain the room to you, relevant for later. The door opens on the right side of the room. Immediately to your left is the light switch, and the queen-sized bed is just beside that. It's a small room, just big enough for the bed and enough room to walk around the bed. The wall in front of the bed has a window. To the left of the bed is a closet with those weird accordion doors. I'm lying in bed with the lights out with my son, who is laying his head on my arm. He finally falls asleep, and I just lie there for a few minutes to make sure he is completely out. Then out of nowhere, I get this horrible feeling, goosebumps, hair standing up on my neck and arms. It was such an evil feeling. Have you ever got goosebumps up your scalp where it feels like your scalp is shrinking? I did that night, so bad it felt like someone had a hand on my head squeezing it. I was genuinely scared, not so much for me, but for my son. I knew deep down if I turned away from my son, something bad would happen to him. I thought if I could turn on the light, I could grab my son and leave the room. So where I was on the bed, I could just barely touch the plastic bezel thing on the light switch. I was afraid to move because I knew if I did whatever this thing was, it would get my son. His head was on my arm this whole time, so I finally changed it. I jerked my arm out from my son and turned on the light. It honestly took a split second. When I turned back to grab him, he was at the bottom of the mattress, like something had pulled him from the top to the bottom in a split freaking second. And I know he didn't crawl down there because he was still fast asleep. So I grabbed him up and we left the room and slept in the front room that night. Something evil wanted my child. That is truly terrifying.
Since childhood, I've had bad feelings in places. Certain rooms have felt bad to me and caused me distress. Since childhood, I have seen black shadows, specifically a black shadowed figure in my room. Whenever I saw this, I would be frozen in the bed. Eventually, I hated the thought of sleeping alone in a bed and would jump in with my sister. This happened frequently. My house is quite old, it is worth noting. Every dog I've had barks at random parts of the house. My younger sibling used to speak about the red-haired man who walks around the house and comes down from above. The worst experience I've had, which I labeled as a vivid dream, was waking up to someone's hands around my throat. I couldn't breathe and couldn't get away. I was screaming, but no one could hear until suddenly it released. I didn't wake up as I'd been awake the whole time. At least that's how it felt. I looked around the room and was frozen. It must have taken about 10 minutes for me to get the confidence to stand up. Anyway, this all sounded crazy until one time I mentioned it to my mum. She'd had the same experience, as did my 2 aunties when I told them. One of these aunties told me that she had been told that a red-haired man followed our family, but he was no real threat. This continued to happen till my grandma passed away. Once she passed away, it sounds ridiculous, but whenever I'd see a dark shadow, there would be a small flash of white light. It made me feel comforted and the figure would disappear. This went on for many years. Until one night I had a dream. In the dream, I got out of bed and walked around my house. I heard a noise and followed it to a room. It was one of my recently deceased relatives and she had come to me. She spoke to me and was happy to see me first until she looked sad. She told me that she had bad news about my mum. I had a long conversation with her in detail about this. But when I woke up, I couldn't remember any. It was like a block was on my brain. I told my relatives about this dream. Shortly afterward, my mum passed away unexpectedly in that same room. It seemed to connect to me. Since then I have had dreams with my mum. She speaks to me. Aside from this, I've felt the bed pressure shift as though someone is sitting on it. This is only in the room she passed away in. I've also had moments of feeling cold, sometimes followed by a pleasant warmth. I've also had things related to my mum's fall. I told my mum before she passed to give me signs she was with me if she could. Today I walked into the room she passed in and saw a white shadow figure. This is the first time I've seen a white one. Only dark figures in the past. I'm not suffering from any mental health. I'm not a massive believer in this nor a skeptic, but I don't know how to make sense of it all. Any advice, help or opinions, please? Thank you.
Right, so this might not be the right place to post this, but I'm gonna do it anyway and just see what people have to say. So a couple of years ago I found out my mate was into communicating with the other side and all that stuff. I've had some experiences as a kid but won't go into that as we'll be here all day. He's been to mediums and stuff and showed me the chain method, spins clockwise for yes, anti-clockwise for no, side to side for maybe. Anyway, we're doing it, and from doing stuff find out there's some bad energy following me. That night I woke up to something tapping my shoulder, looked over, and saw a shadow figure leaving my room. We gave this thing the name Shadow Man, not knowing it's common to see these things. From then on life always seemed dull and dark. I was never happy, and I seemed to always have bad luck. Whenever I tried the chain it would go yes, maybe, no, yes, maybe, so on and so on. We meet up one day, I show him it, he gets freaked the fuck out, and we vowed never to even try contacting the other side again and forget it ever happened. Couple of years later he bumps into this medium again and they get on the topic of the afterlife, and the medium tries to contact the other side with him. The medium then starts dripping with sweat and says there's bad energy with him for some reason, and it sort of gets left at that for whatever reason. A couple of months later I decided to do the chain again after about 2 years. It works now, so I start asking it about this Shadow Man, and through asking questions find out it was sort of attached to me, if that makes sense. But the time when me and my mate did it for the last time, it went on to him and has been with him ever since, is having the same symptoms I did, but we never really put two and two together. This bad energy is trying to pull him down and trap his soul, was told on a voice box we used tonight after I told him what I found out on the chain the other night. My question is, has anyone had a similar experience, and what do people have to say about it really? Thank you for reading, and any advice would be appreciated.
Hello, I don't post often, but I'll give it a go again. Whenever I was a little kid, many about 6 to 7 years old, I was living in this house. It wasn't that old, but it wasn't brand new, and I'd been living there for years before and after this incident, and this never happened again, so it still confuses me to this day, and I always bring it up around friends when we discuss the paranormal activity and random shit we experienced. So when I was a kid, I was sleeping like usual, and it was a normal night. I don't know what time it was because I had no access to my phone and no clock in my room, but I woke up in the middle of the night and I was facing the side of the main room on my bed, not the wall. My room was very small. I had no desk, so I had space to play with all my toys back then. Anyway, when I woke up I saw something that still creeps me out. There was this family of shadow people just looking at me from right across my bed. It looked like it was a father, mother, and a little boy or girl, both about my age. Me being a kid, I freaked out and just turned around, shut my eyes and went back to sleep. As a kid, I always slept with a chair beside my bed. I would fall off my bed on more than one occasion and not wake up because I'm still to this day a deep sleeper. Back to the story. A few nights later I woke up in the same position, but on the chair that was right next to my bed was another shadow figure. It was one of the mothers, and it seemed that she was running her hand through my hair, just petting my head. As a child back then I shouted for my mother, and she came and turned the lights on, and the figure disappeared like it was never there. That was the last time I saw anything from those figures. Seems weird, seems made up. I thought I might be crazy when retelling this story, but it happened. It's just such a vivid memory. If anyone knows anything about anything like this, I would like if we could discuss it in the comments. It would be nice. Thanks for reading. I'm just some random lad from Ireland.
When I was 11 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night and heard something repeatedly running up and down the hallway. My mother was the only other person in the house, and I know for a fact that she was asleep at the time. The sound that I heard didn't sound like adult footsteps. They sounded more lightweight and rapid, like that of a scampering toddler. And no, there were no pets in the household. My bedroom was at the dead end of the hallway, and these scampering footsteps would repeatedly run from one end of the hall to the other. But every time they reached the end where my bedroom was situated, there would be a momentary pause in front of my door before resuming. This same cycle repeated for about 5 minutes, and then it just abruptly ceased. I sat upright in my bed, petrified with fear the entire time this was happening, and was much too afraid to open the door during or after. I still have no idea what was making that sound, but I got a distinct feeling that whatever it was seemed to be aware that I was aware of its presence. Don't ask me how I know that. It's just one of those things that you can feel, but you can't rationally explain it. The second incident occurred a few years later when I went down to the basement workshop to retrieve some tools. As I was standing in front of the pegboard selecting what I required, a female voice aggressively growled directly into my left ear. I immediately went into an adrenaline-fueled panic and dropped everything I had in my hands before sprinting out of the workshop and up the stairs like a frightened cat. Even remembering that now makes me feel an icy chill throughout my entire body like I did when it happened. That incident was far more traumatic than the previous one. I live in a city in northwestern Canada that is somewhat remote, and the neighborhood I grew up in is situated on land that was once an indigenous village inhabited by the Laidley Tena people. Their entire village was burned to the ground in 1913 by British colonizers who wanted to permanently drive them out of the area so they could annex the land. Make of that what you will. I don't know if it's connected in any way, but I thought that it might be worthwhile to mention it. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like either of these incidents?
Just about 15 or 20 minutes ago, at the time of typing this, my wife and I were leaving our friend's house when we saw what we thought was our friend's mother twisting and making unnatural body movements. She was wearing the same clothes we saw her wearing less than an hour before, had the same hair dye, and looked almost the same in the face, but something was uncanny. As we approached, the awkward and human movements stopped and they took a fight stance and froze still with a look on their face both filled with hate and completely emotionless at the same time. I almost rolled my window down and said something to them thinking it was her, right before I realized something was off. They stared at us and I said hesitantly to my wife, "That's Wendy, our friend's mom." My wife replied, "No, that's not Wendy." We were both unsure and couldn't decide if that was her or not. It looked exactly like her, but something was off. We couldn't put our finger on it. For about 10 or so seconds we all sat frozen and it felt as if they were in the car with us. We have tinted windows, but they were looking right at us and did not break eye contact. It was a very intense, uneasy feeling that my wife and I both experienced. I realize I can drive away and do so. By the time I get to the next stop sign, a half a block down the road, I look in the rearview mirror and see they are now walking towards our car, due south, whereas when we first encountered them they were heading due north. Seeing them in my rearview mirror heading toward the car, I quickly turned the corner and took off. We called our friend and asked him if he would check on his mother. He misunderstood and his mother, and he went and checked to make sure that none of the cars at the house had been broken into. So we know that wasn't her out there. This all takes place about 2-4 blocks from my friend's house at about 12:30 a.m.
I had an experience this week that left me very confused and briefly scared. I had just gotten home from picking up my 1-year-old son. My wife and 5-year-old daughter were out of the house on errands. I was in the kitchen working, my son on the floor babbling and playing with pans, and over his babbling and banging I heard clear as a bell my daughter's voice say, "Hey Dad," which came from downstairs where the entrance to the home is. My dog also paused and looked in the direction of her voice as if excited she was home. I paused thinking they were home early from the gym and I yelled her name and my wife's name. No answer. I quickly went out on the deck to see if my wife's car was there, which it was not. I got a chill because we were the only people in the house, I know that. I texted my wife and told her what happened and asked if they were somehow fucking with me or if she had a toy that could voice record, which she does not. I don't know what it could have been, but I know me and the dogs heard it clear as a bell. I do not live in a haunted house. My house is 2 years old and I built it myself. I am concerned because the only thing that truly scares me is something that can mimic or try to draw you away. I have had other experiences on my property that make me worried about what it could be. I don't know what I should do, but I do not want it in my house.